Well, today we're saying goodbye to our oldest and largest pawpaw tree. This is our Tennessee seedling. It's probably going on 26 years old, and it probably started going into some sort of decline a year or two ago. You can kind of see where it starts splitting at the bark and all, and then there we go, a lot of bark die off or something, and now there is no sign of life on it, despite it having bloom buds that we're fixing to flower, you know, probably in a month or so from now. So it went into a decline, and it is officially dead. Let's look at here at the side here. Although that is sad, we have two suckers right here from that tree. This guy here is probably going on 5.5, 6 foot. This guy here had a failed graft before. It probably would have been about 5 foot maybe. Let's see if we can get it to, and we have one here that is grafted on one side, and we just cut this one previously, so if that graft fails or something, we got 2 points of grafting, but we also got stuff below, which would be the original Tennessee seedling plant. I'm assuming this plant is about 13 to 14 foot, the original tree tall, and it stayed very short for probably 7 to 8 years. It was like probably less than 3 foot tall, barely grew any, and then eventually it shot up really high. You know, every year it was growing, and I think there's sort of a point to be made about establishment and growth rate, especially when you go south of that Florida panhandle area where it's not as cold, not as long of winters, not as harsh of winters, and something that just takes these pawpaws sometimes a long time to establish. This is another seedling that is probably 10 or 12 years old, and I got 2 small grafts on the bottom that I did like 2 years ago. And this is all the original seedling. As you can see, that's maybe 3.5, 4 foot tall at most. And here's a grafted one. It's probably 10 years plus. You know, of course they haven't started leafing out yet, and there's a flower bud, first flower bud, and you know, a 10-year plus plant, but you know, that tree is not big enough to support it. This is another one that's probably going to be in that 12 or so year range. I got a graft here, a KSU Atwood, and it's about maybe 4.5 foot tall at max. Some failed grafts over the years. Got one here. I think this is a grafted one. It's died or had some breakage, limb breakage, I guess, over the years, and or it'd probably be at least 3 foot, but it's probably 24 inches, and it even has a little bit of suckering down there. Right here is another grafted one that's probably at least 8 years old, probably 21, 22 inches tall. Now, this one actually grew pretty well. This is the Florida panhandle seedling. It's been blooming every year. It's probably only about maybe 11 or 12 foot tall at the tallest, but it seems like it's going into a little bit of that decline as well. See, you got some bark damage right there, a little bit on the opposite side here, a little bit here. In my about 26 or so years experience with experimenting with pawpaws here, I've probably had, there's like 3 ways it can go. Maybe 4. It dies within a year of planting it, and sometimes these micro grafted plants you get just seem to be destined for failure no matter what. 2, they can go into a slow decline. They might live for 3, 5, 6, 8 years, grow a little bit, and then have a lot of dieback, a little bit, a few inches at a time, until they go all the way to the ground, and eventually they just do not come back. 3, they take forever to establish, just like that Tennessee seedling. You know, it took many years where it just stood at like 3 feet, And if it growed any each year, it's probably an inch or two before it took off. And it took like, it grew like 2 foot in a year, then 2 or 3 foot, and then grow until it kind of slows down. Then very rarely you get something like this panhandle seedling that was probably, 18, 30 inches or so when I got it. And what was amazing about this was this guy was blooming about year 3. Not 3 years of having it, but at about 3 years of age. So it probably had 2 years of age at least when I got it. And within a year or so, it was blooming. This guy is going into like a decline at a much younger pace, age than the Tennessee seedling. And I'm kind of wondering if it maybe is a cross between triloba and maybe the pygmy pawpaw, because they kind of cross paths. They're even down, further down south of the panhandle natively. And those pygmy pawpaws look very similar, the flowers and everything, as the triloba, the northern tropical pawpaw, as some people call it. I think the most common out of those 4 things is that death within, a planting season. Secondly, having that decline, and third, obviously, is having that very, very slow, just not doing anything for years and years and years before it takes off. That Florida Panhandle seedling, that was like 1 in maybe 30 or so plantings, maybe more than that. And let's be clear, I've planted them everywhere: high ground, low ground, root dense areas, non-root dense areas, shade, semi-shade, sun. So, we've planted them in every location. Most likely this is all acidic soil, swamp muck, in these low areas like this. And this is a root dense area. But this is probably kind of similar to how they would grow in the, northern wilds of Kentucky or, Appalachia. So, like I said, I probably have around 26 years of experimenting with pawpaws. I don't have like 1,000 acres to plant, thousands of them on. But just trying and failing and then getting some, some hope, and, then getting flowers and then some fruit. We're still not successful. But I do have a theory of not exactly why they fail to establish or take a long time to establish, further down south than that Florida Panhandle area. First, the lifespan of a pawpaw is not that long. Peaches are maybe 12 years, maybe a little bit longer if you take care of them and you're lucky. And I think I was looking at, it might have been University of Kentucky or something, where they had a pawpaw breeding program, and they were talking about 17 years of production on a grafted tree, so maybe a 2-year-old rootstock, you put your graft on it, and then, it maybe flower within 2 to 3 years, may not even be able to hold fruit unless it thrives and gets really big. So it might be several more years after they start flowering before they can hold on to a fruit, before the branches break or before they get immature fruit drop. So there really isn't, let me clarify this. There probably isn't a reason to buy grafted pawpaws, even if those grafted varieties will flower and fruit below that panhandle area. If those grafted plants either die within a season or they decline and die, they're never going to be fruitful. And in almost the best case scenario, where they take a while to establish, by the time you get potential fruit on your tree, you have a very low lifespan, very limited. However, when you start getting root suckers from a seedling, I have noticed that those root suckers are way faster growing. They're way healthier looking. They will outgrow your grafted plant or maybe even your seedling within maybe 2 to 3 years sometimes. For example, maybe you could have a tree like this that's 4.5 foot after about 12 years of age, and then it forms a sucker over here or 10 foot away, and in 2 years time that sucker is twice as tall, twice as big, twice as healthy, maybe more vigorous, more round, bigger trunk. So my advice, or preemptive, I'm going to say my preemptive potential conclusion of how you should treat pawpaws south of the Florida Panhandle is to treat them as a 20 or 30 year plus project. Have you got time for that? Plant your seedlings. If they fail to thrive, if they die, you're out of minimal cost versus getting grafted pawpaws. And there's no use, in my opinion, to graft until you see those root suckers, until you see that vigor come out from, some good establishment. Unless you get lucky and you just get a seedling or a couple seedlings and they're just so happy, like that Florida Panhandle seedling, and they just shoot up fast. So when I say a pawpaw is short-lived, of course the grafted section is short-lived. But if that main seedling, that main rootstock survives and forms suckers, those suckers, that root system, that is a way to potentially make the pawpaws live almost indefinitely. A lot of people would probably just chop those suckers down. But, like I said, I think that is the key part of potentially being successful this far south. So keep at least one sucker. So if your main tree dies to the ground, you have a lifeline. Either if you like that seedling and want it to survive forever, or if you want to graft onto it. Scion wood is pretty cheap. You might have to pay shipping on it, but you can buy, order online, during the scion wood season, January, December, March, whenever it is. And then you can get as many varieties as you want. I can't guarantee you all those varieties will flower and fruit here this far south, but I can tell you for sure that some do. Like sunflower flowers the heck, mango doesn't flower very much for me. NC1 does a pretty good job. And once you have the root suckers forming and thriving, they're pretty easy to graft. I have probably 40 to 60% success rate without wrapping the grafts, just doing, a cleft graft. And you probably have more success if you do a whip and tongue or something like that. I think the key, once you get those root suckers forming, and maybe when you find a cultivar or a couple cultivars that you like and that are successful for you, is to make a backup, make multiple backups. Take a cutting every 5 years or whatever, and graft onto some of those root suckers, or all of them, and that way everything that flowers is going to be top quality fruit. I feel like I haven't made enough progress in this 26 years, but I've been working on other experiments for other plants and fruiting trees and stuff like that, including a lot of hawthorns and elderberries and everything like that. So if I would have had time, resources, land, we probably would be a lot further along. Once you get those flowers, as long as you have 2 genetically different cultivars, everything then is, do you have a large enough branch or a large enough tree to support fruit, and can you successfully pollinate it, hand pollinate it? You can do the meat trick maybe, where you wrap a piece of rotten meat somewhere high in a tree or on a stick or something. I've heard that's pretty common. But down here, the guy that does them in Gainesville says that he has someone come out that I guess is a plant breeder, I'm not sure, and he just Q-tip pollinates them with a Q-tip. So he collects pollen on his own and for his own experiments, I guess. And he comes to this other guy's yard, and just by him doing that, he's pollinating this guy's trees, and he's having much more fruit than he had before the hand pollinated. So, in conclusion, preemptive conclusion, potential conclusion, don't get into pawpaws this far south unless you have a lot of time. And my suggestion, get multiple seedlings, not grafted trees, and try to let them form a thicket, patch, whatever you call it. You want to have those root suckers, because those root suckers always seem to thrive and have much more vigor than the main tree you plant for whatever reason. Guess of 20 to 30 year time frame. People probably in Ohio or something are probably saying, you're crazy, there ain't no way we could plant a pawpaw and have have established fruit on it in like 3 to 5 years and be happy. But that it just does not seem to work as quickly down here. You may randomly get lucky like I did with that Florida panhandle seedling, whether that's a hybrid or a different species like the pygmy versus the triloba that just got mixed in with the batch. And it just, it flowered early. It shot up with a lot of vigor, even though it went kind of in decline, maybe at a younger age than most of the trilobas do. I will probably take a few extra cuttings this year from this panhandle seedling and give them away, trade them or something. Because if it's going in decline, how many more years does it have? Does it have this year, maybe one more, maybe two more? And like I said, we got root suckers from it. So just like that Tennessee seedling that we had with the root suckers, this guy hopefully will live on for a very long time, even once this actual tree here just dies to the ground.